So Rob Gulden, it says grew up on farms in Germany and Manitoba. He's got a master's degree with N fixation, a PhD in volunteer canola. I guess he taught it how to grow. And then he did a postdoc in corn and soybean systems at the U of Guelph. Now he's at the Department of Plant Science, has been since 2007. There is no one better to set the scene for strategies for winning agronomic battles, a case study on herbicide-resistant weeds. And so I welcome Rob, and I'll give him 10 minutes to set the scene.
Thank you, Tommy, for the introduction. How are we doing for sound? Can we hear? Perfect. So I did prepare an 80-minute presentation like a typical academic, and I thought I was going to get 10 minutes, but we're back up to 10. It's good to know.
Fair.
I started in the minus. Okay, thank you. All right, my job here is to take about 10 minutes to set the scene for the weeds situation in Manitoba. Maybe I should have had an S to that weed now that I look at the title. And I will start with, first of all, our, is that working? There we go. I'll start with the crop situation in Manitoba. As some of you may know, well, most of you know that today we grow a lot of soybean in Manitoba, but that wasn't always the case. And it was in around 2010 when soybean really started to take off. But before that, we grew a lot of barley and oats in lieu of soybean. And so our crop rotations have changed quite dramatically, and that obviously affects the herbicides that we use. We use a very different herbicide package in soybean than we did in barley and oats. And it also affects, the wheat populations are also affected by the competitive ability of those crops. And of course, barley and oats are our most competitive cereal crops, more so than wheat. And soybean is perhaps a little bit less competitive. And I wanted to point that out because I'm going to, there we go. I'm going to talk a little bit about the weed surveys in general before I get into the resistance survey. And the last weed survey that was done in Manitoba, you see all the data compiled here, was conducted in 2022 by Julia Leeson at Ag Canada. And these surveys are a very unique resource for us in Western Canada because I don't know anywhere else in the world where we have or anyone has that level of detail on their weed populations. These surveys were initiated by Gord Thomas in the 1970s and have been conducted using the same methodology all the way through, and they're now done on a roughly 5-year interval. And they give us an idea of what the mid-season weeds are in farm fields across the province, and are done across all 3 prairie provinces. And the Manitoba one here, you can see in 2022, 704 fields were surveyed, and green foxtail is our top weed, has been always, and probably will continue to be there as number 1. Wild buckwheat's number 2. Volunteer canola has moved up to number 3. That used to be wild oats, and our change in crop rotations probably has a fair bit to do with that. And so forth. And the relative abundances of those weeds are provided. On the side here, we've got the changes over time. And there's some interesting stories there. And again, they're, I think, to some degree reflected by the crops we grow. And that is green foxtail, as I said, that's the yellow line, is the center. Anything above it has gone up in rank, and anything below it has gone down in rank. And so we have red-root pigweeds moved up a fair bit. Kochia has moved up, obviously for multiple resistance most likely. Volunteer canola has increased a lot over the last 40 some odd years. And again, that's probably driven by herbicide resistance and the fact that it's a challenging weed to manage in soybeans or will cost extra inputs in soybeans to control. And wild oats has fallen down a bit. It used to be number 2, it's now number 9, but that doesn't mean that it shouldn't be a concern, and I'll get to that in the next few slides. In the bottom here, we also have a little bit of history in terms of our wheat populations in fields in Western Canada. And important here is the median density and the weed-free quadrans. And so we got to recognize the efficiency of and efficacy of our weed control systems. In the 70s, we're looking at mid-season weed densities, so this is post-in-crop weed control, of about 50 weeds per meter squared. That's what farmers were dealing with in the 70s, and that just slowly but surely crept down to somewhere around maybe 5 weeds per meter squared. So we are living in a time of most effective and efficient weed control that we've ever lived with in 10,000 years of farming. Interestingly enough, as we have pushed down these weed populations with efficient herbicides, the number of weed-free quadrats has gone up. And so we have much more areas in the field where we no longer have weeds present, at least post-in-crop weed control. And that may open things up for alternative ways to apply herbicides, etc., which hopefully we will discover or learn more about this morning. The herbicide resistance survey from 22, 155 fields of those 704 were sampled. And in that survey, the samplers go in later in the season when weed seeds are mature, and they collect weed seeds, and then they're screened in Charles Geddes' lab at Lethbridge, Alberta, with a discriminate dose of herbicides, usually heavily screening of group 1 and group 2s, and the odd other herbicide as well. And the general gist of it is that tested fields in this last survey, 80% of our fields that were tested in Manitoba had a herbicide-resistant weed in it, so it's quite a bit. The field coverage, that percentage, is how large the patches were, or how much of the individual fields these patches covered, and that's about 50% of the fields as an estimate. That's a lot. That total patch area, 3.4 million acres. We only farm about 9 to 10 million acres in Manitoba, so not a small portion. And the total fields that are affected, as I said, 80%, or 7.4 million acres. And the cost that producers estimate this costs them on an annual basis is around $81 million. So this isn't the cheap hobby that we have. Moving on.
That's 5.
That's 5.
Yeah.
Whew. Still got 18 slides.
Nope.
No, I'm kidding. Little history about herbicide-resistant weed biotypes for those of you who aren't quite as old as I am. Some of us here were around since the beginning, and that all started with that field that you see in the top corner. That's a field of flax. Yes, that's a field of flax. And the producer had applied a group 3 herbicide, and nothing happened to the green foxtail. And it's probably not the first year it looked like that. And so those breeds were brought in, and Ian Morrison screened them, and they were resistant to group 3s. And the same year, group 2 resistant kochia was discovered. And early on during the discovery phase, when Ian Morrison ran this resistance program, individual weeds were checked out after a farmer had complained or had problems with herbicide efficacy, and some of those turned out to be resistant, some of them less so. So we found individual cases along the way: group 4 resistant wild mustard, group 1 resistant wild oats, group 1 resistant green foxtail. Then we get to green foxtail that's multiple resistant, 1 and 3, and some more other biotypes. Then we run into wild oat that's a 3-way resistance, group 1, 2, 25. Another wild oat population that's 3-way resistant, group 1, 2, and 8. Was tested later again to then also be resistant to 14s and 15s, and 14s and 15s didn't exist when that 1, 2, and 8 was selected for. And then we get into the surveys. These are initiated by Hugh Becky in 2002, and we've got the weed species that were discovered in those surveys, the resistant new biotypes, listed above them. Every now and then we find in those, or outside the surveys, we do additional surveys like the kochia one for the group 9 resistant kochia, group 2 and 9. In 2014, that was discovered in Manitoba at 5% of our fields infested. 4 years later, 50% of our fields have group 9 resistant kochia in them. And that's only gone up. And then tall water hemp came along somewhere in the late teens, and that's resistant to group 9 and a number of other things. In this latest survey, I've got a dotted line there. There are about 7 new biotypes that haven't been confirmed yet, and so it probably won't be all of these that will stand the test of time, but they are being screened with dose response curves right now to better understand whether those whether those are indeed resistant. The bad news is on the bit below, where we have wild oats, group 1 resistant wild oats, where in Manitoba now 100% of our fields that have wild oats in them have group 1 resistant wild oats. And don't worry, it gets worse. 2 minutes?
2 minutes.
I talk fast. So bad news with wild oats is that we have every field in Manitoba that has wild oats has a Group 1 resistant wild oat population plant, a Group 2 resistant wild oat population plant, and a Group 1 and 2 multiple resistant population. So keep that in mind when you make recommendations going forward. Green foxtail, we're still dealing mostly with Group 1 and Group 2 separate individuals, not multiple resistant, and so forth. Kochia is well represented in Manitoba as well. This is glyphosate-resistant kochia. You see all the dark dots in Manitoba. In the latest survey show that we have lots of it distributed throughout the province. Our new friend, tall water hemp, again not part of the main survey yet, is also increasing now that we've learned how to identify this weed. We expected that weed to come from North Dakota and Minnesota, and it probably did initially, but the 2024 map now shows, and we added, I think, 8 new municipalities in 2024 that is well distributed within Manitoba. And so it's another one to keep an eye out for. And it's generally resistant to Group 9s, but probably also a few other things, mostly determined by genetic testing. And 2 more slides in the last 10 seconds I have are, here's Charles's map of all the herbicide-resistant weed biotypes across Western Canada, and I've circled in yellow the ones we have in Manitoba, so we are well represented across the board. We have a little bit less Group 2 resistance than perhaps Saskatchewan and Alberta. I think that's a function of Saskatchewan being much more reliant on pulse crops than we are, which of course have limited herbicide spectrum that's available. But nonetheless, we are well represented across the spectrum of Group 1, 2, 4, 5, even 14, 15 resistant individuals. And last but not least, hopefully a little foreshadowing to where we want to go today. Contemporary weed management. What got us here is that we rely very heavily on that big pink circle called chemical weed control, and we do a little bit of cultural and physical control. On the cultural side, I would argue we'll always think on the wrong side of things, not necessarily on the weed control side of things. And hopefully throughout the morning we will learn more about some of these other control techniques that we can use.
Thanks, Rob. You're only 30 seconds over.
30, not bad.
Okay, good, excellent.
I will walk off stage now and take over.
Great setting of the stage. Questions later when Rob comes back down and mediates, I think, the panel.